Prince William inherits the houses of dead strangers multiple times a year. People who never met him, never voted for him, never knew his name was attached to their front door. They die without a will, without relatives, and their home becomes his. There's no court case. There's no negotiation. A rule written in 1337 says it's his, and that's the end of it. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not an insider claim. That's on the website of the law firm that handles it. Let me show you exactly how this works, because once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. The legal term is bona vacantia, Latin. It means vacant goods, and the firm that administers it for the duchy, Ferrer & Co., describes it in language so dry it almost hides what it's saying. Their site reads, "When someone dies intestate, without a will, and without relatives entitled to the estate under the intestacy rules, the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall administer the estate if the person's last known address falls within the duchy's respective geographical jurisdiction." Translate that. If you die in Cornwall and you didn't write a will, and there's nobody left who's legally your family, your house doesn't go to the government. It doesn't go to the council. It goes to the Duke of Cornwall. And the Duke of Cornwall is Prince William. Not because he claimed it, not because he applied for it.
Because a charter written in 1337, when Edward III sat on the throne and the Black Death hadn't yet reached England, established that whoever holds this title gets whatever's left when someone in that territory dies with nobody to leave it to. 689 years later, that rule still runs, and it fires several times a year. And here's the detail almost nobody says out loud. It isn't one duchy, it's two. The same mechanism, the same Latin, the same logic. It runs in the Duchy of Lancaster as well. And the Duke of Lancaster is the king himself, Charles. So if you die without a will and without relatives in Lancashire rather than Cornwall, your house doesn't go to William. It goes to his father. Father and son, two duchies, two territories, one principle, written in the 14th century. And between them, they cover a significant slice of England and Wales. Ferrer & Co. mention both in that same sentence on their own website. The duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall administer the estate. Plural. Stated as if it's the most ordinary thing in the world. And legally speaking, it is. Now, before we go further, the duchy has an answer to this. And it's important. And I'm going to give it to you in full because it's the heart of the whole argument. Their official website states that the Duke of Cornwall does not profit from these deaths. The exact wording, after any discretionary payments have been made, all monies are donated to charity. So that's the defense.
The money doesn't line his pockets. It goes to good causes. And I want to be fair. That's their published position, and there's no evidence in front of me that contradicts it. But read that sentence one more time, because there are 4 words in it doing an enormous amount of work. After any discretionary payments have been made. Discretionary, meaning at someone's discretion, meaning somebody decides what comes out first before the charity number is calculated. What are those payments? How much are they? Who signs them off? The sentence doesn't say. It just quietly establishes that there's a stage between the dead person's house and the charity, and that stage is at the duchy's discretion. Maybe those payments are entirely reasonable. Administrative costs, legal fees, the actual work of processing an estate. That's probably exactly what they are. But here's the thing about a system where one man's organization decides what's deducted before announcing that the rest goes to charity. You're taking their word for it, and nobody outside can check the arithmetic. Which raises the obvious question. If it all goes to charity anyway, why does this structure need to exist at all? Think about it purely practically. If the goal is that the estates of people who die alone should fund good causes, there's a far simpler route. Let it go straight to the state, the way it does everywhere else in England, because that's exactly how it works outside these two duchies. Where there's no Charles and no William, unclaimed estates pass to the crown via the treasury, and the government handles it from there. So Cornwall and Lancashire are an exception, a specific one, a personal one. And it exists not because someone in the 21st century decided it was a more efficient way to fund charity. It exists because in 1337 it was written down that way, and nobody has ever repealed it. The duchy's defense, all monies go to charity, answers the question, where does the money end up?
It doesn't answer the question, why does this money pass through a private individual at all? And that, honestly, is the far more interesting question. Now let's zoom out, because Bona Vacantia is one small pipe feeding a much larger machine, and the size of that machine is genuinely hard to hold in your head. Prince William took home $21.6 million in private income from the Duchy of Cornwall in the 2025-26 period. Private income. Not the sovereign grant, not taxpayer money. His own personal income from land. And what land? The Duchy portfolio spans 23 different counties across England and Wales. It includes the Oval Cricket Ground. Yes, that oval. It includes 67,000 acres of Dartmoor, tenant farms, holiday cottages, commercial property, investments accumulated across almost 7 centuries of royal estate management. The result? Prince William is the biggest private landowner in Britain. Not one of, the biggest.
And it's worth pausing on that scale for a second, because the phrase £1.2 billion slides straight past your ears. 67,000 acres of Dartmoor. That's not a field behind a house. That's a national park. Granite moorland, wild ponies, a place people travel across the country to walk in. A substantial chunk of it belongs to one man, because his great-great-great and so on grandfather was handed it by a 14th century document. The Oval is where England have played Test cricket since 1880, a ground that means to British cricket roughly what Wembley means to football. The land under it belongs to the Prince of Wales. Tenant farms, people pay rent, to William, not to an abstract crown, to a specific man whose name is on the paperwork. And all of it arrived in a single day. In September 2022, Elizabeth II died, Charles became king, and in that same second, automatically, without a single signature, William became the largest private landowner in Britain. Not because he did anything, because his father got a different job. Here's the part that makes the whole structure make sense. He didn't earn it, he didn't buy it, and he can't lose it. And one day, the second William becomes king, it passes, instantly, without a decision by anyone, to his son. The Duchy's website spells this out with almost startling bluntness. The Duchy's 1337 charter established that the Duke of Cornwall is the eldest surviving son of the sovereign and the heir to the throne.
When the current Prince of Wales accedes to the throne in the future, HRH Prince George will become Duke of Cornwall. Prince George is 12 years old, and there is already a £1.2 billion estate spanning 23 counties with a mechanism that harvests the homes of people who die alone, waiting for him with his name pre-written into a document from the 14th century. Nobody voted on that. Nobody signed off on that. It just happens because a king in 1337 said so. Now, here's where the timing gets genuinely interesting, because the same set of accounts that revealed William's $21.6 million also revealed something the palace was very keen for you to focus on instead. King Charles made history this month. For the first time in the history of the British monarchy, a reigning sovereign voluntarily published his personal tax bill. $12.9 million in income and capital gains tax for 2024-25, $11.7 million the year before, over $30 million since he took the throne, placing him, according to palace officials, among the top 100 taxpayers in the entire United Kingdom. William published his too, $7.76 million in tax for 2025-26, the first time he's ever made that figure public. And the headlines wrote themselves: transparency, modernization, a monarchy finally opening its books. Except, and this is the detail that reframes the whole gesture, Charles has no legal obligation to pay a penny of it. Zero. The relevant tax legislation explicitly does not apply to the crown.
The duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall share that same legal immunity. Charles pays tax voluntarily, under a memorandum of understanding his mother established in 1993, which could, in theory, be revised or abandoned at any point by the very people it applies to. So the transparency is real. It's also entirely optional, self-defined, and revocable by the person doing it. And the timing? The Washington Post reported from London that the first ever tax disclosure by a British monarch was partly intended to contain the damage from revelations about the finances of the king's disgraced brother, Andrew.
That's the context. Months of Epstein files, an arrest on a birthday, an open police investigation, and then, suddenly, a headline about the king being one of Britain's top taxpayers. Financial analysts started pulling the numbers apart within hours. Tax Policy UK examined the disclosed Duchy of Lancaster income, calculated what it should generate in tax at the maximum rate, and found a gap. The difference implies at minimum an additional $4.2 million in income from Charles's personal investment portfolio, a portfolio whose existence is confirmed in the royal finances documents, but whose size and income are, in their own words, not disclosed. So we know what he paid. We still don't know what he has. And in the same week, the very same set of announcements, came the news that stunned royal historians. Charles will not move into Buckingham Palace, ever.
Not after the renovation, not for the rest of his reign. The keeper of the Privy Purse confirmed it. The King and Queen will stay at Clarence House. British taxpayers have spent £369 million renovating that palace over 10 years. It's scheduled to finish next year, and the current king won't live in it. And William has already indicated he won't either, planning to stay at Forest Lodge in Windsor when he becomes king. Graham Smith of the campaign group Republic did the arithmetic out loud. The government agreed to spend £369 million refurbishing Buckingham Palace, and now Charles doesn't want to use it. But the public won't get to own it or decide what happens to it. It will remain under lock and key for when he does. He also noted the sovereign grant is set to rise to $99.9 million from 2027, up from $31 million in 2012, pointing out that if it had merely tracked inflation, it would stand at $45 million, not $100 million. There's one more thing worth saying, because it makes the picture honest. The Duchy of Cornwall isn't newly under scrutiny. Bona Vacantia surfaces in the press periodically, and every time the same cycle repeats. A journalist finds the rule, the public is briefly astonished, the duchy replies that the money goes to charity, and it all goes quiet until next time. It isn't a scandal, it's background noise that never becomes anything. And that's the genuinely interesting part. Not that it gets written about, that nothing changes. Because changing it would require an act of parliament, political will, someone willing to stand up and say, let's repeal a rule that's been running since 1337. And nobody does, because why would they? It's legal, the money goes to charity, nobody's been harmed. And the fact that the system routes the estates of people who died alone through the personal accounts of a future king before it goes anywhere, that's just how it is. Historical accident, nobody's fault. So look at what we've actually assembled. A $369 million palace nobody will live in. A sovereign grant that's more than tripled in a decade. A voluntary tax disclosure that's genuinely unprecedented and that leaves an unexplained multi-million-pound gap and an undisclosed private portfolio sitting right next to it. And underneath all of it, quietly, a 689-year-old rule that transfers the homes of people who died alone to the two men at the top of this family several times a year, automatically, with the money passing through a discretionary payment stage that nobody outside can audit. Here's my honest take. I don't think William is doing anything wrong. I want to be clear about that. He didn't write the 1337 charter. He didn't invent Bona Vacantia. The duchy says the money goes to charity, and I have no evidence it doesn't. He inherited a machine that was already running, and by every account, he runs it more openly than anyone before him. He published his tax bill when he didn't have to. But that's exactly what makes this worth sitting with. The story isn't that someone's cheating. The story is that nobody has to. The system does it on its own. A rule written when England was still fighting the 100 Years' War means that if you die in the wrong county without the right paperwork, your house becomes the property of a hereditary landowner. And the only reason we're even having this conversation is that a Holmes editor at a magazine happened to write it up on a Thursday morning. There's a version of this where the monarchy is genuinely modernizing. Tax bills published, palace open to the public, accounts scrutinized. And there's another version, running at the same time, in the same week, in the same set of documents, where a medieval charter still quietly moves dead people's property toward a 12-year-old's future inheritance. And the explanation for where the money goes is one sentence on a website with the word discretionary buried in the middle of it. Both are happening, right now,
simultaneously. And the question I'd leave you with is this. When Prince George turns whatever age he'll be when his father becomes king, and that charter fires, and $1.2 billion, and 67,000 acres of Dartmoor and the Oval, and the houses of everyone who died alone in Cornwall that year all land in his name at once, will anyone ask whether a rule from 1337 should still be running this country's property law?
Or will it just be another Thursday morning, another article, and another sentence about discretionary payments that nobody reads to the end?